Hello, my name is Ercan Öztürk, and I'm a PhD student in computer science at University of California, Irvine. And today I will talk about the Thermanator, thermal residue attacks against password on external keyboards. This is joint work with Tyler Kaczmarek and Jean Sudik from University of California, Irvine. Let's first discuss a common scenario. Let's assume that you are working at a shared workspace and you arrive at work in the morning, and then you go to your desk and workstation, enter your password. Hopefully your workstation is password protected, and you enter your password. And then while you're waiting for the login process to finish, either you get bored or login process finishes, you check a few emails, you click the mouse a few times, then a colleague comes in and calls you to a meeting or to just get some coffee, or you just decide to step away on your own to get some coffee or go to the bathroom or something like that. And you might be security conscious and you might lock your computer. And this actually looks like everything is fine. You did everything by the book. And by locking your computer, you prevented any lunchtime attacks. But is there actually a problem with this scenario? And the answer is yes. And the problem is you didn't wear your oven mitts. And the reason for that is or wearing any other thermal insulator is humans are warm-blooded, and we actually leave thermal residues on things with which we come in contact. And these include keyboards. And the keyboards are mostly made of plastic, and they are poor conductors, and they retain heat for a while. And you can see an image here. Password, actually here is password, and you can clearly see the keys pressed on this image, which says that this might be actually an attack surface. And related work on this area mainly focused on recovering pins, 4-digit pins mostly. And first work by Zalewski on cracking SACE, and Maury et al. Did some work on comparing material composition of the target and camera distance using a thermal camera, and they also worked on some different data analysis methods. In addition, Wodo and Hanslick has shown that there are multiple devices that might be vulnerable to thermal residue attacks. And there is also some work on mobile devices to mostly recover screen lock patterns. But there has been no systematic investigation of thermal residues on external keyboards, and especially for passwords. This was our main motivation to do this research and work. And we discovered we defined an attack, which is Thermanator, and it's also known as coffee break attack. It comes with two flavors. The opportunistic one is the victim steps away after typing their passwords on their own accord, and the orchestrated one, there's an accomplice which draws the victim away, and then the attacker can take the thermal picture of the keyboards and then evaluate the results and image it gets. So we actually have two videos that describes this attack in a more visual way.
The opportunistic Thermanator attack is exactly this happens. The victim belongs to a shared workspace, log in, and then shortly thereafter, for whatever reason, log out perhaps to refresh the coffee. Notice this, the adversary will seize the opportunity. They will use their thermal camera to record the residual heat from the victim's login, and once that's done, return to their terminal. They can review their collected data at any time after this point.
This was the opportunistic version of the attack, and there is the orchestrated one.
orchestrated Thermanator attack is a little more involved. Instead of waiting for a victim to get up underneath their own accord, the adversary employs an accomplice. This accomplice actively lures the victim away. Once they're gone, it's business as usual. The adversary uses their thermal camera to record the thermal residues of the victim's type. Once that's done, just like before, they are able to review the recorded data at any later time.
So we had some questions in mind about this attack. For example, how dangerous are these thermal side channel based attacks? And what is the realistic attack window? Because that's gonna play an important role. And what does attack success actually require? Does it depend on users' physical attributes, for example, fingertip size and shape and pressure, applied pressure while typing the key? Or does it depend on password strength, comparing weak passwords to strong passwords? Or does it depend on typing style, hunt and peck versus touch typing, which we'll go into more detail? And does it depend on keyboard type, brand and model? And we did experiments to actually get answers to these questions. Our attacker was a moderate attacker which has access to a mid-range thermal camera. In our case, this was a Fluor SC620, and it cost around $1,500. And it has a thermal imaging frequency of 1 Hertz. It can take 1 image every second. And it looks like actually a video recorder, basically. And this camera, when we compare it to other options in the market, which cost around $25,000 and $100,000, it's a pretty moderate attacker model. And we did experiments. This was our experiment setting. You can see the thermal camera perched on top of the tripod, on top of the keyboard. And we designed a 2-stage experiment. In the first stage, we recruited 31 subjects, and each entered 10 passwords on 4 different keyboards. And we took images of these keyboards up to 1 minute, and at the end we had 60 images. Some of these passwords were weak, like password, football, and I love you, which we gathered from recent data dumps. And some of them were strong. They were randomly generated by us, and they had different lengths, 8 characters, 10 characters, and 12 characters. And these passwords were entered on 4 popular keyboards, one Dell, HP, Logitech, and ASIO. Here's a sample video that images actually added together and how it looks. You can see that the password here is actually password. And even in that 5-second loop, you can still see that in the last few tenths of seconds, you can still see a few keys. But how do we actually quantify the attack success? For that, we designed another experiment, the stage 2, which had 8 non-expert subjects acting as adversaries, and they were shown 150 thermal recordings in random order. And they were asked to identify lit regions. They were not asked to guess passwords. We just asked them to think which regions are actually lit on the thermal images. And let's take a look at the results. We should probably first discuss about our distance metric here between the actual password and the set of keys that our stage 2 subjects were able to get from the thermal images. Here we have, for distance calculation between those two, we summed up the number of missed keys by our stage 2 subjects and number of misidentified as pressed keys. And the time here shows that the latest time that this distance was the number given here. An example, here we have football in the first part. And we can see that the first bar is D equals 0, which means that all keys in the password were able to be recovered by our stage 2 subjects. And they were able to do that until the around 18th second. For I love you, this was around 30th second. For password, this was around 20th second. For alphanumeric passwords, the results are similar. We are just showing these in two different images for ease of viewing. For example, for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, full recovery was around 20 seconds, and Jordan 23 around 20 seconds, and password around 20 seconds. For 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, that was an interesting case. Since each key is actually pressed twice, it helped our stage 2 subjects identify which keys were pressed for a longer period of time, around 45 seconds. When we take a look at the results for secure passwords, we can see that the full recovery time, which is D equals 0, the blue bars, drops compared to the other ones, compared to insecure passwords. And the reason probably for that is, since these are actually randomly generated passwords, they have not been seen by our stage 1 subjects. It took longer time for them to find the keys and then press those keys. And for the first password, this was around 15 seconds, 10 seconds, and around 15 seconds. And while going over the results, we discovered that also the typing style is one of the differences between, created differences between the success of our stage 2 subjects. For example, you can see here a Hunt and Peck typist typing Jordan 23. And every key press here is a key in the password. But when we take a look at a touch typist typing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, we can see that there are additional keys, ASDF, JKL, and semicolon, which are usually used by touch typists. They perch their hands on the home row, which are these keys. In addition to that, these actually thermal residues leak to other keys close by those home row keys and created confusion for our stage 2 subjects. So when we compare these two typing styles, for alphabetical passwords, we can see a drop in full recovery in the blue bars. For football, it was around 25 to 30 seconds, but for touch typists, this dropped down to around 15 seconds. And there's a similar trend for all these passwords when we compare Hunt and Peck typists and touch typists. Also the same case for alphanumeric passwords, except 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, we can see that other passwords actually full recovery time actually dropped. As mentioned before, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4 is a special case that we see since each key is typed twice, it's easier to recover. Also, in our distance metric, we did not add the home row keys as false because there's no way to understand whether those keys are actually pressed or those keys are there just because the touch typists kept their hands on those keys. Also for secure passwords, we can see that full recovery time for the first password drops from 30 seconds to around 10 seconds. So all in all, our results were for password recovery, entire set of key presses, our stage 2 subjects were able to recover entire set of key presses as late as 30 seconds, and they were able to recover partial sets up to 1 minute, which shows that this attack can be successful. And when we compare typing styles, hunt and peck typists are especially vulnerable since every key they press is actually a key in the password. When we take a look at the data to see whether we can gather any ordering information, our stage 2 subjects were not able to come up with reliable or key press ordering information. And the possible reasons for this is pressure, timing, and area differences of fingers and presses, and also combinations of all these factors. But we have dictionaries. For non-random passwords, we can describe a distance metric, like one we did, and we can use that distance metric to compare the keys that we are seeing in the image to the passwords in a password dictionary. How do we mitigate, how do we prevent actually this Thermanator attacks? We can introduce chaff typing, typing extra keys while we are typing our passwords, or swiping on the keyboard when we are done with typing our password. And in addition to that, we can consider keyboardless password entry options. For example, using a mouse. Displayed characters are displayed on the screen, they are in random order, and we can pick these keys. Or we move away from passwords, which does not seem to be, which probably is not going to happen in the close future. And another option is for mitigation using long acrylic nails, gloves, or, as we said before, oven mitts. Actually, we had one subject who had long acrylic nails, and we were not able to see anything on the any of the thermal images that we gathered. Black hat sound bites. Using plastic keyboards to enter password is even less secure than previously recognized. Post factum, which means that after the fact of entering our password, thermal imaging attacks are realistic, and one of the reasons for that is niche devices such as thermal cameras are becoming more mainstream and more accessible, which makes these attacks more realistic now. And we should either stop using keyboards for password entry or abandon passwords altogether, if possible. So further info can be found on the project website, and our group at UC Irvine is Sprout, and the full paper is available on archive. And if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them. Questions?
First of all, would using something like modifier keys such as shift or GR actually make the password guessing process harder since you don't know which keys were used in the modifier?
It does, yes. Even if you see that shift is pressed, you don't have much idea on actually which keys were pressed with shift, so you don't get much enough information from that.
So what kind of mistakes do people tend to make when they fail to recognize that correctly? So do they tend to just drop out keys, or do they actively make errors? Like, can you just go through implementations of the keys and add extra ones, or is that more complicated stuff? Do you need to do to actually guess faster?
For non-random passwords, we can use dictionaries with a distance metric. For random passwords, it is not easy to get the ordering information. Actually, for any password, it's not easy to get the ordering information from the thermal images. But as you said, using a permutation might be actually pretty big space for random passwords. But one thing, since we are considering the insider attacker here, an insider attacker can use other side channels to actually improve their chances of getting the random passwords too. For example, using acoustic emanations to have an idea on which keys are actually pressed and in which order.
What about now? I mean, you have a laptop and there is a CPU directly connected to the keyboard. So, does the heat of the CPU hinder your kind of attack?
We actually did a few experiments with laptops too, but as you said, since the CPU is actually right under the keyboard, it actually, even if you press a key, it is not easy to actually understand that key has been pressed. Also, the same scenario applies if you have a smartphone. Those devices are pretty compact and everything is basically together. Under your screen you have your CPU, which heats up the screen, and also the screen actually heats up too. So it's not easy to understand those keys have been pressed, any patterns that you're entering on your smartphone. And one of the papers actually worked on this area. They used cold boots. They just turn on the phone, they entered the pin and the swipe pattern or the swipe pattern, and then they try to get the pattern or pin. And they were not able to get it in other way, like your phone is on for a long time, then it's probably not possible to get the keys, swipe patterns, and pins.
That using a higher precision camera makes sense than that in the demonstration.
We used a camera that was around $1,500 used. We have not experimented with more like a $25,000 and $100,000 camera. I am not sure actually how successful the attack is going to be, but if the sensitivity is pretty high, then you might have a chance of getting more fine-grained thermal images so that you can observe the keys better, and maybe you might be able to get the ordering information. Question?
So another question, let's say in a standard condition where you want to prevent this problem from happening, so what would you propose as a countermeasure? In a production environment where you can just throw out keyboards, or for example replace passwords at having a large production environment?
For external keyboards, one mitigation might be just swiping your hands after entering your password. That might be an option. Or I think one of the solutions that we saw, and it was actually patented, I think, like the heating up, actually, the keyboard actually is heated up to the maybe the finger temperature, so that even if you're actually pressing the key, then you will not be able to see the key. But if you, for example, wash your hands and the temperature of your hands change, then you might still be able to see the keys pressed.
So you see them as a dropping temperature rather than a thermal print.
Yeah, any change in the temperature actually gives you a side channel on the password entered. Thank you all.